Lazarus passeth by. There may never be another night like tonight. Tonight may be the last time that Jesus will ever pass your way again.
Upon the mountain.
Christian crusades are nothing new in America. Since the country was founded, the evangelical movement which George W. Bush identifies with has launched recurrent crusades to renew and reform American life. They had always hoped to do so by converting individuals to Christ, not by directly political means. In the mid-20th century, a new religious revival began to surge. It was led by the Reverend Billy Graham.
Oh, if we could only come to the place of all-out commitment, we could turn the world upside down and start a counter-revolution, a spiritual revolution with love instead of hate and prejudice, following the Christian flag, until Christ is known around the world.
More than 40 years ago, in my college training for the ministry, I was instructed repeatedly, religion and politics do not mix. The premise, I suppose, theologically was that ideally, if we meet the spiritual needs of society, we automatically, as a side benefit, cure the political and social ills. Idealistically, that's a correct premise. But in reality, it doesn't work out that way.
In the 1950s, a new ideological threat pushed some evangelical leaders toward political action.
It has been called a religion. Certainly it is more than a social theory, more than a method of political organization or an economic system. It is a directed way of life. It is communism.
The communists were a worldwide missionary program. They wanted conquest of the earth, just like the Muslims do, just like the Christians would like, only the Christians don't do it by force, except for stupid aberration in the Crusades.
I don't think that we are full Americans if we're not concerned about our nation, as well as our politics, as well as our faith.
Christian Crusade presents the worldwide anti-communist ministry of Billy James Hargis, America's crusading evangelist.
On today's program, we're going to discuss the communist war on God. I wonder if you realize, friends, that
in the beginning it was hard to sell them. They didn't jump on my wagon. I had to put some fear in there. I'll be real honest with you. I hesitate to use the word, but I had to tell them some of the terrible things that are happening. I had to tell them some of the terrible things that I think is going to happen if we don't change this political situation, if we don't change our religious concepts.
Ladies and gentlemen, why are we ashamed of God? Why are we ashamed of our founding fathers at a time?
And they would come to hear this fat kid talking about God and country.
To help us save this country from godless Antichrist communism. Now, the communist teaches that the individual is not important. The communist teaches that man as an individual is not important at all, that even private property is not important, that all of it belongs to the state, that we should live for the state. Jesus taught the opposite. He taught the value of private property, and he taught the value of the dignity of the individual and the importance of every individual soul.
Man desires to be independent, and therefore, in my opinion, ultimately, he is not going to accept the Soviet system, which denies the existence of God, which most people believe in around the world.
If communism threatened their values from abroad, evangelicals saw a more immediate threat at home, the prospect of a Roman Catholic in the White House. Evangelical pastors called a meeting to confront Kennedy with their fears.
The reason for our concern is the fact that your church has stated that it has the privilege and the right and the responsibility to direct its members in various areas of life, including the political realm.
And if my church attempted to influence me in a way which was improper or which affected adversely my responsibilities as a public servant sworn to uphold the Constitution, then I would reply to them that this was an improper action on their part, that it was one to which I could not subscribe, and that it would be an unfortunate breach of an interference with the American political system. I'm confident that there would be no such interference.
We would be most happy to have such a statement from the Vatican.
Kennedy's election was a turning point for the evangelical movement's involvement in party politics. The election of a Roman Catholic as President of the United States wasn't the only social change angering evangelicals.
In your travels across the country, have you noticed a lot of resentment to the Supreme Court decision banning prayer and Bible reading in the schools?
Oh, yes. I think there's a tremendous resentment, and I think that if a vote were taken in the United States, it would go 80%. It would be overwhelming to have prayer and Bible reading in the schools. I think with certain safeguards, because all groups must be protected. But I think that our way of life was built on the Judeo-Christian concept. And I think that this is a nation under God.
It is important for us, if we're going to maintain our constitutional principle, that we support Supreme Court decisions, even when we may not agree with them.
That really touched my button, because I felt we were stifling free speech, and that the government, contrary to the wishes of the founders who wanted neutrality as the policy of the government towards religion, in fact, the government was becoming hostile, in my opinion, towards religion.
Is moral responsibility out of style?
Believing that traditional values were now under siege, evangelicals looked for a presidential candidate they could actively support.
I say it is time to put conscience back in government.
When I first got started in politics in the upsurge for Goldwater in the late 50s and early 60s, the traditional values activists who used to be traditional values believers but were not activists before made the determination as to which party they were going to affiliate with. And it was clear that the Republican Party was the party that was most hospitable to them, and there were people like me out there working to recruit them.
Why do we see wave after wave of crime in our streets and in our homes? Why do we see riot and disorder in our cities, a breakdown of the morals of our young people? My fellow Americans, is this the time for our federal government to ban Almighty God from our schoolrooms?
It looks as though President Johnson's absolute margin is going to be a record. However,
Goldwater's loss intensified evangelicals' sense that they had lost control of their country.